All right, it looks like we are live, so hello, everyone. Sorry, we're kind of angled strangely here. Thank you so much for joining me. We are, of course, streaming live from the Adobe booth at IBC 2019 here in Amsterdam. And today I have two amazing humans, amazing people, who are going to talk to us about what it takes to transform large broadcast productions to smaller screens. And at the end, I was going to actually reference a feature that we have announced here today at IBC that kind of speaks directly to this. But before we get to that, let's first introduce Sabrina Rodriguez. Sabrina, you are the Global Head of Digital Marketing at Dentsu Aegis Network, and I'm going to have you talk a bit about your role there and stuff in just a moment. And Joanna Sumyk, graphic designer working for ORF since 2008. You just gave a talk moments ago, so we're going to embellish more upon that. So maybe start with you, Sabrina, kind of just tell everyone a bit about your role and what it is that you do.
Sure. So, hello everybody. Lovely to be here. I, as Jason mentioned, head up digital marketing for Dentsu Aegis Network. For those who don't know, Dentsu Aegis Network is a network of advertising agencies based around the world. We're based in around 145 countries. There's about 950 of those agencies, but we have 10 leadership brands. And we basically work with our businesses, our clients, in terms of helping them win, keep and grow their customers across each stage of the life cycle. My role is really sat in the comms and marketing function at a global level. So my job as the owner of the Digital Marketing Center of Excellence is to make sure that all of our markets and our brands have everything they need to build their own digital marketing strategies and innovate the way our own brand is built. So that consists of strategic support. We provide content, toolkits, and of course platforms. And that's where all the great work we do with you guys at Adobe comes in. So yeah, that's what I do.
Awesome. And Joanna, a bit on your history in graphic design and moving to video and all different types of things.
Well, hello. I work for the Austrian broadcast company, and I am an information graphic designer. So I work for the news. I do not create the whole design of a broadcast. I really work for the news, daily things you see every day on screen if you watch news, the statistic things, pies, curves, things like this.
Nice. So, in talking about this and talking about the kind of stuff that you're producing now, I know that, the landscape for all video has changed radically so much. So specifically in the types of work that you're doing, I'll start with you, Joanna, how has it changed, say, in the last 10 years, what you were producing 10 years ago and the speed at which you produce it versus today?
Well, the ORF is a very traditional broadcast company.
Okay.
And when I came, work looked like the editor coming with a piece of paper, and the paper is saying, well, 20% of something is less than last year, blah, blah, blah. Please, I need the pie. Mm-hmm. And then you made the pie. So right. Nowadays, it's like we are part of a team. And the whole team creates a show. And I also talk with the editors about the footage. Mm-hmm. They need to create the show. So my part is not only to make this pie, my part is also to create a concept with the editor, how it should look like and which picture we take for the show. So my work became more complex, I have more responsibility, I have more, I'm flexible, mm-hmm. and it became faster.
Sure, right. First and foremost, I imagine that's probably the main change with everything is that you're having to just deploy more content so much more quickly.
More content, and they use really more graphic design because that's a catchy point. Mm-hmm. If you see an interview and you see a person talking like blah blah blah, explaining something, and you fall asleep in front of your TV, and as far as something happens, something pops, colorful, wow, and you're there, and you're again into it.
Right.
So the editors know they have to catch the people in front of a TV.
Right. Makes sense. And Sabrina, for you, I mean, I imagine just in your role, but in just digital marketing in general, 10 years ago, such a different landscape compared to today.
I mean, it's been completely and utterly transformed within like the past 10 years. I mean, social media was really in its nascency, and you know, really, I haven't even worked in advertising all my career. I started working in sales and service for Telefonica, which then kind of evolved to work in social media, and then I'm now obviously working in digital marketing and advertising. But the one thing that's kind of stemmed throughout my career is content. Content is everywhere, and it's required. It's always been required, but the way that we build content has changed. So, and I would say it's particularly at Dentsu, I'm finding that video is predominantly the major kind of format that we need to start working with, and the volume of video that we produce has grown exponentially. Year on year, we're producing 87% more video in terms of volume. Compared to last year, and
was there even any video component really 10 years ago?
Well, exactly. I mean, back then it was sort of a 30-second ad that you would then repurpose and copy paste everywhere else, right? So now, you know, with the emergence of new channels, new formats, it's no longer enough. You really need to think about the storytelling, contextual content that makes sense for the audience in that channel. So it needs, firstly, the volume has grown, the breadth has grown. So we're not just talking 30-second ads, we're talking Square social video, we're talking portrait UGC, we're talking live broadcasts. You know, the breadth has just expanded and will continue to expand, particularly with kind of VR and AR and gamification and more interactive, holographic technology. I mean, it's just going to kind of keep accelerating. So, it's still changing super, super fast.
And I think what's really interesting too is, again, as you think about the tool set and people's accessibility to all the various platforms. I mean, for you, Joanna, how does something that you're designing specifically for broadcast TV change or get altered when you're doing like for maybe the website or for social or for some other platform? What's the mindset behind the adjustment there?
As you say, there are different formats, and they are smaller because it's a big difference to produce something for the TV because the screen's getting bigger and bigger in your at home, but everyone is looking at these small devices, and it's a very, very small screen, and so you really have to be creative to make something that catches you on this little tiny screen.
And a sort of follow-up to that, how much do you think that the design aspect of that affects consumption on those devices, Because on a large television in a broadcast context, yes, there's some design elements present, but here we know in the world of sort of mobile acquisition, it has to pop in a different way, whether it's color scheme, whether it's something else visual that's happening, How does that change, or what's kind of the thought process behind how you have to make that more engaging to someone who's acquiring it here?
Last day, so we have a website, and we produce content for this website. And I often heard this sentence from the editor, well, you've done this well, that's really nice, but, you know, for the web, I needed a little bit different. So it has to be bigger, more colorful. I did a design I did a logo for a format. It's you can see it on TV and in the web, and everyone loved this logo. But when it came to present it on web, they said, "Well, the logo is nice, but the title, I cannot read the title on my telephone." So I had to change this. And it was, I didn't like it that much, but it was, they needed this for the people to read this, to be able to read this. You know what I mean? I mean,
And I would like to add as well, I suppose in that context is social, The sound-off environment. Visual impact has never been more important. So just to kind of what you were talking about, we've been experimenting with subtitles, and you know, having the subtitles at the bottom of the screen no longer cuts it in social. You need to be much more playful, much more visual. and really experiment with grabbing the eye because they're not going to hear anything. So,
sorry.
I was just going to say, when we were testing that out, we saw engagement go up 38%. So, it really does have an impact on how people engage.
I have a nice little story. Sometimes we have school children if they can look around how it is, the job of an editor, a graphic designer, whatever. And I work for the Channel 1, and it's no problem there for the school children to sit around in the meeting, in the main meeting.
Yeah.
And the head editor guy, he just asked them, well, do you look at the TV news? Do you know news?
Right.
Yeah. And they were like, no.
Right.
So what?
Yeah.
Do you read news? What do you do?
Right.
Well, internet. Okay. And the next day, they again were in the meeting, and so he's asking again. So did you watch TV? Did you watch news yesterday? Yes, we did. So did something stick in your mind? And one of his guys said, yes, the graphics, they were fantastic.
Right.
And that was the only one thing he could remember.
Super interesting, right? And actually, this kind of segues. And by the way, you've answered so many of the questions I already had for you.
Sorry.
They're just too good. I know. We're gonna have to stretch it all out. But this brings up a really good point about trying to, one, as a brand, develop consistent content, but also outside of that consistency for your look and feel, how do you remain fresh and relevant and equally as eye-grabbing? Like, what's your advice to brands to kind of maintain that strategy, if there is one? I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a case by case, but I think really this is where data comes in. So particularly with social media, data is a goldmine when it comes to building and iterating your content strategy. That's another thing. You don't need to have a completely polished end-to-end content strategy when you launch.
Right.
You need to kind of experiment and see what happens, but have a clear idea of who your audience is in your channels. So, when we launch a campaign, for example, the way that we might launch it to, say, a B2B audience, like the CMO of a big client of ours, will be very, very different in terms of not only the tone of voice we use, the format we use, versus, say, talent that we want to attract to our business.
Right.
So that might be a little bit more playful, and it might live on Instagram, and it might be a little bit more gritty and a bit more interactive.
Right.
So I think, the way that you create your content strategy has to keep ultimately the whole story in mind in terms of what you're trying to communicate,
right?
What action you're trying to drive, and then tailor that to your audiences. There are some really cool things going on as well in our business around DCO. So that's dynamic content optimization, for those who don't know. But our leading agency in that, Presto, has been doing some really cool things around making sure that the content that we deliver to the customer is entirely optimized and tailored to the context. So whether that's the channel, the time of day, whether the offers have changed. And traditionally that was kind of looking at static and animation, but increasingly we're looking at video and even sound.
Right.
So, the whole video production process of having a polished end-to-end video is changing.
Right.
We're now having to think about building puzzles, like pieces of a puzzle that we pull together and create a new thing. And
even the stylistic delivery of those has changed too, right? Because you just kind of said the golden word, which was polish. And this kind of segues into my next question for both of you, which is kind of plays off of the story you just told. Polish and, again, like end-to-end, looks done. Do you think that kind of breaks a bit of that intimacy that people have when they access on a device? And I guess the question is, do you think that delivering to these kinds of devices, an acquisition here, kind of the way you're talking about, well, the graphic was cool, like, does it create more intimacy? And even having it a bit rough, nowadays, like in video, it's really common to have jump cuts all over the place, right? YouTube, vlogging has changed this. I can remember being on this very stage not many years ago, and if we showed something with a jump cut, we'd have someone walk by and go, oh, nice, real professional. you're very good at what you do. Sarcasm.
Yeah, it's a different
Right.
world.
It's a different world now, right? So again, I'm curious as to if you think that delivering for the smaller screen, one, is a more intimate experience, but also do you also feel like you're learning more about the customer in those in the delivery of content for smaller screens? Is there something to be learned from there? Because again, I'm thinking about for you, especially like television news, these kinds of things, and I hadn't thought about it really. I have young kids. Do they watch the news? No, never.
I'm sure they are not.
I don't think they could tell you a news network. Maybe the BBC, because they watch Monty Python and Fawlty Towers. But outside of that, I also forced them to watch a whole bunch of Lulu on Top of the Pops recently, as well as I got on a Cilla Black kick. This is a diversion here, but so we're watching Surprise, Surprise. That's neither here nor there.
And not Blind Date.
I didn't get to Blind Date yet. I had to make it through Surprise, Surprise. I wanted a good laugh, cry moment, you know. Intimacy for smaller screen. Do you feel in the type of stuff you're producing, is that relevant? And then I'll ask the same of you, Sabrina. Do you think there's a more intimate connection when designing for the small screen? Or is it expected? Like a personalized, intimate delivery. When I look at something that's produced from a network, there is this sort of, it's fun, it's a bit looser, and I feel more connected to it versus if I'm watching it on my, you know.
Yeah, I think it has to be touchy. Yeah. Yeah, it has to be, well, maybe not the right word for a video, but it has to be touchy. I think that's the word, because there has to be a point where you catch the people and get them into the story.
Right.
So it has to be something direct. You cannot still talk about something just delivering information.
Right.
That's not enough anymore.
And I was going to say, and a headline isn't enough either, right? It used to be that the headline is what grabbed people. Kind of the opposite now. They probably don't even read the headline half the time. It's more about what visual is accompanying whatever it is that the story is about.
We had a redesign of a website like 2 years ago, and we had the big discussion about if we will get a long read or not. Really, it was the discussion, and it went like a long read. I don't want to have a long read because I'm not scrolling 5 minutes down to get the information. I want to click.
Right.
And the other one said, no, I don't want to click. I click every time. I want to read something. And two worlds, really.
Right.
I think what's interesting as well is that, particularly in a social context, it's not a broadcast channel. I mean, it can be used as a broadcast channel from maybe an ads point of view, but I'm a purist when it comes to social media. So my view is it's a participation network. So you have to invite the user in and get them to engage with it in some meaningful way.
Right.
So this is where social media has really transformed the way that certainly advertising works when it comes to driving that meaningful engagement. And obviously, at the very start of social media, that was like a like or a reaction. We're now entering a world where, Instagram and Snapchat in particular are really innovating in this space when it comes to driving, real interaction beyond just a like, and into things like questions and polls and conversations and, lenses that you can share and adapt and tailor. It's a completely different experience.
It's a constant request for user feedback and engagement.
Yeah.
You're sort of fishing for people to keep re-engaging in different ways to see what sticks, right? If it sticks.
Yeah, and we had, interestingly, we had Instagram and Facebook take over our Instagram for a week.
Oh, right.
And they completely blasted Instagram stories in terms of just taking advantage of every single feature that could possibly be used.
That you could use on the platform.
And in that week, we saw engagement go up 800%.
Wow.
Like, it was just a whole other level because, Facebook just came in and just went, there you go, that's how you use it. And, over 6 months, we've seen 200% increase to our careers site. So it's driving real business results if you just really take advantage of interactive content on social. And I think video has a lot to learn in that space.
Yeah. So following up on that for both of you, what kind of trends are you seeing in those spaces? Because I think that's something as often as I'll watch a story or occasionally go to Snapchat and look at some of the way things are produced, there's definitely sort of cyclical, obviously with all things, cyclical trends and things, but are there any specific trends that you're seeing that are relevant today, right now?
So interestingly, social media was really born out of the gaming industry.
Right.
And I think what's happening is there's this sort of virtuous circle where it's coming back to where it came from. And I think the lines between social media and gaming are blurring again.
Right.
So, gamification is a huge feature, I think, in kind of social video that Snapchat are obviously really pioneering. But I think, that's going to be really interesting when it comes to a career of a designer, because a typical graphic designer now needs to start thinking about 3D, and now they need to start thinking about gaming design, and suddenly there's a whole other career path.
Right.
So
almost like it has to be engagement design now.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
It's a whole other discipline.
Yeah. And what do you think? I'm curious, especially with the work that you're doing, Joanna. What do you think in terms of design background? I see, and we meet tons of users from all over the world every day. Young, amazing, talented creatives who have no training necessarily. They're not, like, I suffer from font anxiety. I'm recovering. I have terrible font anxiety. So I always stress over fonts to use. And I'll talk to some 10-year-old who's doing amazing stuff in Instagram stories, with crazy text or whatever. And I'm like, how do you know what to choose? Literally, how do you know? Do you know any of this? I don't know. I just go with it. That's how my brain works.
I had the same experience. We had a practicant. I don't know how you trainee or something. Yeah, a very young guy. I don't know. He was 13 or something.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, 10-year-old showed me this stuff.
He said, I will show you what I am doing at home, and he showed me. He made an intro for someone. And it was like, I was looking at this and I was like, wow, how much did you get for this? Right. And then the guy said, 10 euros. And it was like, what?
Dropping all the rates for everyone in the design industry right there. It's teenagers.
Yes.
That's
well, and that's how it goes. It was like, I don't know.
But that's so common, right?
We just have two people that they're able to do something like this,
and they just do it. And I imagine part of that is, one, growing up in this era, so seeing all of this, right, and seeing it change so rapidly. Whether it's the different types of text animations or certain, color swatches and color combinations that obviously will always traditionally work, but used in a new, more modern way. And it's so cool that you're mentioning gaming because, we started so we're live streaming today. Adobe started our live streaming daily work back in Twitch, actually, in 2015. And Twitch at that time had just started their creative channels. And to say that we weren't exactly, going viral there is an understatement. But it was the beginning of all of that. And more importantly, though, it was a new way to really understand direct audience engagement and how the engagement can go really crazy over random things. And I guess what I was going to ask you is, now that you're saying, and it's coming back to that, and even Twitch themselves is having this kind of resurgence where, right, it's not only about gaming per se, or creative disciplines, or just showing your work or doing things, but it's all about the people watching you and how you feed them to just continue to drive this machine that pushes brand, content, your shop, your e-store, selling merch. There are so many people now that I see selling merch they play Warcraft or something. They're not even designers, but people want kind of whether it's their hair or some branded look about them on a t-shirt, and they're selling hundreds of thousands of these. So what do you think there is? What's fueling all of that with such desire?
Yeah, well, I think this is, again, nothing new. This is just basic peer-to-peer community behavior that's existed since the dawn of social media
and intimacy,
gaming.
right? Though
absolutely.
People feel completely connected, even though it's really disconnected, right?
Yeah.
It's one way sound communication, right? Yeah. And then you're just reading, and you're reading emojis.
Yeah, but it can be very personal. I actually did a panel with Twitch earlier this year.
Right.
And one of the influences and one of the content producers from the network was on the panel and was talking about how he has a set routine and every day he goes live, twice a day or whatever.
Right.
But he knows his community. Like, he knows his super users. And again, it's that peer-to-peer relationship where he kind of acts as, say, a brand ambassador, and then his kind of followers then engage with the brand through him.
Right.
And then they engage with others, and sort of your brand or your advertising or your sponsorship or whatever kind of lives and breathes in this sort of peer-to-peer community of sharing. And again, that's nothing new. I mean, that's basic online forum community management methodology. So, but it's incredibly powerful, and I think brands are really now starting to realize that power of a peer-to-peer if you really know how to embrace it.
And I think it also speaks to something you said before, which is there's also, I mean, yes, you can be scheduled and you can have sort of very specific things that you do within your community to keep them engaged. But ultimately, well, one, it's the live aspect, one. Two, it's also fairly raw being live like that. And as anyone who streams knows, things happen. Again, I stream when I'm not traveling 4 or 5 days a week. And sometimes, brace yourselves, the apps crash. Yes, they do. We've all seen it happen. But no one cares anymore. And I don't, try to cover it up. Think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you were doing something and something screwed up, you'd freak out. And then you'd feel that weirdness from people watching you. And you'd feel them going, oh, shame. But now you embrace that mess.
I think there's a humanity in the vulnerability.
Of course. And that, to me, that, again, it drives that intimacy. It makes that digital disconnect of text versus human even more connected, because everyone there is going, that's happened to me. Oh, I get it. Oh, look at how they're being so silly or derpy or whatever it is. And they just really, and they want to give you more. I think what I find really fascinating is just the concept of like subs, right? Subbing, pledging money for months on end to watch someone do what they enjoy. But there's this, they feel like, you're speaking to me, you're engaging with me, and that's kind of, that's making it worth it as entertainment and also as just a community.
For the news, it means what I think it's the interactivity. Mm-hmm. It's the most important thing.
Right.
Because some broadcast companies already does that on the website, that you read a news, and then you have a possibility to click further in the topic. So you have 3 possibilities and you can click one that is of your interest, and then you get into the topic deeper and get another information. So it's something like this interactive books. Do you know interactive books? You're reading until page 10, and then you decide yes or no, and then you can
go to page 15 or page 20. Sure.
So that's the kind of thing going on now, and that's keeping you can catch people with this. I used to
read those series. Choose Your Own Adventure. They were marvelous. And actually, it's interesting. A couple of years ago, when we were kind of featuring some of our VR content and VR storytelling was becoming a thing, there was this concept for cinematic VR where not only is the person fully immersed and engaged, but ideally they'd be able to choose, because they're immersed in it, they could choose to be to experience that film and that narrative in a totally different way, kind of in this same concept, right? They're choosing not to listen to the actual person who's giving this, narrative over here, but they're watching the kid who's on the couch, playing guitar, not listening to his father doing whatever, and changing the story and creating a different level of engagement altogether. And
I guess that's why Netflix Bandersnatch was so popular, because it's that idea. It was well, again, nothing new, but it was the first time that Netflix had kind of launched this interactive UI, and that was exciting. Suddenly you were participating. So I think over the past 10 years, we've kind of gone from an age of broadcast to an age of engagement to an age of participation. And that is what's key. Like when you're thinking about your content strategy, how can I get my customers or my users more involved with this rather than just looking at it?
I love this idea of participation. And I think that's, it's funny because we hear engagement so often, but it's participation. It's you are a part of something. that's larger and with many other people who also want to be part of that same thing.
Yeah, and I think that's born out of the floodgates that have been opened through social media. You know,
right.
Brands and governments and official bodies have never been under so much scrutiny and accountability.
Right.
So, we expect to have a place at the table. It's quite rare nowadays to have lighthouse brands that, we don't want to hear from our customers. We know best.
Yeah.
That's quite rare now.
Yeah.
So that is certainly, I would say, the zeitgeist of like where we're going with consumer behavior.
Yeah. I asked the main editor of our web editor office. I showed her your questions, and I asked her, what do you think? Where does it develop, the whole thing? And she smiled and she said, well, just tell them Instagram.
Right.
That's all. Just tell them Instagram. And I'm not on Instagram, but my son is on Instagram.
Yeah.
And a few days before I came here, he said to me, your brother is in the US. And I was, oh, wow, really? How do you know that? I don't know that. And he said, well, I've read the story on Instagram.
Right.
And that's how you said, that's this community thing. Yeah. Because I was on a trip with him, and I made photos, and I've sent a photo to my husband, and he said, why do you do this? And I said, well, because it's fun. And he said, that's not fun. I said, but you're on Instagram. That's a different thing, he said, because that's my community.
Right.
So you don't communicate from one to another. You communicate with. You have a community, and you communicate there in the bunch.
Yeah, it's really, and it's interesting too in the business that you're in with broadcast TV. I mean, for me, I would never have thought of broadcast television viewers as a community, right?
But we do have a community.
But there is, though,
there
right?
There is a community.
What I'm saying is, I guess traditionally, I didn't feel like I was part of something, right? I was just consuming. I didn't actually feel like I was part of something. And certainly had I felt like I was part of something, I don't know that would have driven me to watch more frequently. But now, that's a significant driver, right?
Yeah, a special development we have now in the magazine, on TV, as we went viral, you say that? Yeah. On Facebook. And you have people commenting the news they have seen on TV. And now the editors started to drop the comments and to make a new story out of the comments and to integrate the comments into the story.
Right.
So they say, well, we had this topic last week and it was about blah, blah. And we had these comments, and one said, well, that's not possible, and the other one said, that's crap, and they then ask people who know what they're talking about and trying to work out these comments, if they are true or not.
Right.
Things like that.
Interesting. Well, this has really been very, very interesting, and I have a couple of other things I wanted to bring up, but first and foremost, so do you have any advice, both of you, for people wanting to sort of get into this industry and sort of what they should be thinking about and conceptually how they should be thinking about approaching large screen to small screen workflow?
You mean if you start working for something like that?
Yeah.
What I would say to everyone's be curious. Yeah. And never stop learning, and think about sometimes I really have a discussion with the editors how the things have to look like.
Right.
And I ask them, why should I do this like this? And then I hear, because everyone does it.
Right.
And my question is, so if everyone does it, why do I have to do it also? Right. But it's not fitting into the concept, so why do I have to do this like this? And that's something I'm really missing nowadays, because, as you said, everyone is making something. Everyone is making content. Everyone is posting, blah, blah. Everyone does this and that. And sometimes you ask yourself, well, does it make sense?
Right.
So it's really necessary to take a step back and think about the concept and what's necessary to create a really good content and concept that works for you also. Because if you're true, people believe you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, authenticity is everything, right? And sort of copying or being overly derivative. You know, we see this a lot, right? You see where a brand or someone will try and, that's hitting big, let's do that, thinking it's just gonna break through, and it doesn't, right? Because it comes off as inauthentic. Yeah, super cool. Any words of inspiration for those?
Well, I guess I think this is definitely the slowest rate of change we're going to see in our lifetime. So it's only going to accelerate in terms of the art of the possible. So I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time to just get stuck in and experiment. We've got the data at our fingertips now. So I think it's an incredibly exciting time for content producers to, get creative.
Right. And I really do. I love this phrase, like, be curious. Because, again, coming from a broadcast environment, I don't know that I would have thought those words would be leveraged there, right? Well, maybe where I'm from, perhaps. But, in general. But you're right. It's more, it used to be, I know when they would talk about some of the shows and things that we would do here, and someone once said years ago that it's kind of edutainment. It's educational and it's entertainment. And there's a bit of that too, but there's more when you add that engagement aspect and that participation. I love this. I don't know why I hadn't thought of that specific term, but it really is. You're asking people to participate. And it's the same concept with sharing, right? I mean, in general. You're sharing so that there's participation. It's not just commenting, right? It's not just this or whatever.
Yeah, they feel they have to have a part to play.
Right, they have a part to play. And this is really, really critical to success. Well, it's been lovely having the two of you here.
Thank you.
Now, you'll
Thank
both
you
be
for having
presenting for us tomorrow on the IBC stage here at Adobe as well. So be sure to stick around for that on day 2. Any final thoughts or words, comments, greetings in other tongues? Anything?
If you're interested in experimenting with content, get in touch.
Okay. Yes. So perhaps where can people find more info about you?
DentsuAegisNetwork.com. You can find links to all of our brands from there. But otherwise, hit me up, Sabrina Rodriguez on LinkedIn.
Okay. Joanna? Any contact info for you?
Watch the news.
Watch the news. And just like that. All right. Sabrina, Joanna, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. And for those watching on Facebook, thank you. We'll see you next time.